You know, there's just something about declassified documents that gets me every time,
Right.
like
Yeah.
something that was once top secret,
Yeah.
like hidden away in some vault marked
Hey, what a
classified.
peek behind the curtain. The forbidden knowledge.
Yeah, exactly. And today we are doing exactly that.
Hmm?
We're diving deep into some newly declassified CIA documents, dispatch documents from 1964 and 1965, and guess what they're all about?
Let me guess. Something to do with JFK.
The Warren Commission, to be exact,
Oh, wow. So this is going to be good.
and their investigation into President Kennedy's assassination.
This is a period that just never stops fascinating people you know. I mean, the questions just keep coming. And to have these documents, this internal perspective,
It's gold, really. But, and this is important for our listeners to understand, we're not here to relitigate the Warren Commission's findings, right?
no, not at all.
We're not trying to say they got it right or wrong. Instead, we're going to look at how the CIA itself, internally, dealt with the information, the findings, from the Warren Commission.
Makes sense.
Think of it as kind of an intelligence briefing on intelligence.
Uh-huh. I like that.
We'll see what they thought was important enough to share with their own people, what details they were focusing on behind closed doors.
Yeah, because that in itself is fascinating. What did they decide everyone absolutely needed to know across all their stations around the world?
Exactly. So, let's get right into it, shall we? Our first document up is Dispatch 4726,
Okay.
dated December 23rd, 1964.
Right around Christmas.
Basically, it's sending out selected excerpts of the Warren Report, the Warren Commission report, to the chiefs of all stations.
So a pretty wide distribution then.
Oh yeah, global. We'll get into the specifics of who got it a bit later.
Okay.
But at its core, this dispatch looks like it was mostly just informational.
As in?
Just making sure that, okay, all CIA personnel, whether they were overseas or at headquarters, they knew what the official conclusions were.
Like an internal memo. Okay, we all agree this is the public story, this is what we're going with.
Right, exactly. But then there's this one part that really jumps out.
What's that?
They really emphasize President Kennedy's own focus, his concern for presidential protection.
Interesting. And the Secret Service's role.
Exactly.
Well, yeah, I mean, after an assassination, it makes sense to kind of double down on security, right? Like, make sure everyone knows the protocols.
For sure. And they even specifically say, this dispatch, that all personnel, both overseas and at headquarters, have a responsibility to support the Secret Service.
Interesting. So it's not just a Washington thing. It's like everyone's got to be on board.
Totally. And there's this other part. Okay, so the dispatch says that the whole Warren Commission thing, it kind of pushed this issue of presidential protection. And then also, get this, counterintelligence operational cooperation into the spotlight, right?
Okay.
And this was stuff that normally was kept very hush-hush, very much behind the scenes.
Makes
But they actually mention in this dispatch, there were discussions and testimony about how intelligence was being coordinated and how different agencies, the Secret Service, other U.S. intelligence officials, were working together operationally.
I mean, a huge investigation like that, it's bound to touch on all these sensitive areas, how different parts of the intelligence community were or weren't working together.
Yeah, exactly. So now let's get into this distribution list because it's wild.
Okay.
Okay, first up, the AF division.
EF.
Africa. They were sending it to places like Abidjan, Accra, Addis Ababa, Algiers, Bamako, Brazzaville. I mean,
Wow.
the list goes on and on all the way to Yaoundé.
So basically, the CIA had their fingers in a lot of pies across Africa.
Right. And this shows they wanted to keep everyone in the loop no matter where they were.
Makes sense.
Then there's EE division.
What's that? Eastern Europe.
Exactly. Places like Athens, Bern, Frankfurt, Nicosia, Vienna. I mean, this was the Cold War, right?
Right.
So keeping those stations informed, that was critical.
Yeah, any event that impacts the U.S. president, especially back then, it's going to have huge ripple effects, especially in Europe.
Totally. Okay. Then there's FE division, Far East, places like Bangkok, Jakarta, Hong Kong, Honolulu, Kuala Lumpur, Kuching, Manila, Melbourne, Okinawa, Rangoon, Saigon, Seoul, Singapore, Taipei, Tokyo, Vientiane, Wellington. And that's not even all of them.
I'm sensing a theme here. Global reach.
You got it. They weren't messing around. Then there's NE division, Near East, places like Aden, Amman, Ankara, Baghdad, Beirut, Cairo, Colombo, Damascus, Jeddah, Kabul, Karachi, Kathmandu, Kuwait, New Delhi, Tehran.
That's really all over the map.
Then we have WE division, Western Europe, Brussels, Copenhagen, The Hague, Helsinki, Lisbon, London, Madrid, Oslo, Ottawa, Paris, Reykjavik, Rome, Stockholm, and finally WH Division.
Western Hemisphere.
You got it. Asuncion, Bogota, Buenos Aires, Caracas, Georgetown, Guatemala City, Kingston, La Paz, Lima, Managua, Mexico City, Montevideo, Panama City, Paramaribo, Port-au-Prince, Port of Spain, Quito, Rio de Janeiro, San Jose, San Salvador, Santiago, Santo Domingo, Tegucigalpa. It's a world tour of CIA outposts.
Uh-huh. Exactly. It just goes to show, from the CIA's perspective, this wasn't some isolated event. It had implications for their work everywhere.
Right. And it wasn't just overseas stations, this dispatch. It also went to a whole bunch of people at headquarters, too.
Okay, like who?
Well, there's the DDP,
What's that stand for?
Deputy Director for Plans, basically the head of covert operations, and then the ADDP.
Assistant DDP.
Yep. Then you got chiefs of all sorts of divisions, counterintelligence, technical services, the geographical desks, Africa, Europe, and so on.
That's a lot of people.
It's a long list. And it shows us, who they thought absolutely needed to be in the loop on the Warren Commission stuff.
And some offices got multiple copies, right? Like the DDP got two and CRNA got two as well.
You're right. That's interesting, isn't it? Like maybe those were areas where they wanted to make extra sure the information was circulating.
Perhaps they anticipated more questions or concerns from those areas.
Yeah, maybe. And we even know who sent this dispatch out, who originated it.
Who was that?
The chief of CRNA.
Oh, that makes sense, given the whole counterintelligence angle.
Yeah, exactly. And here's another fascinating detail.
Go on.
Each division, like the Africa Division, Europe Division, they all have initials on their distribution list.
Initials? What do you mean?
Like someone, initialed it to show they'd reviewed the list before it went out.
Oh, that's really interesting. Like a final check, make sure everyone who needs it is on there.
Yeah. Okay, so are you ready for our second document?
I think so. Hit me.
It's called Field Distribution BD Tag 5847.
Okay, what's BB?
Not sure. Maybe broader distribution.
Uh-huh.
But they do specifically say field distribution, so.
So overseas stations.
Exactly. Now, this one doesn't have a date on it, but based on what's in it, it seems to be kind of following up on that first dispatch.
So maybe early 1965?
That's my guess.
Yeah.
Okay, so this one is interesting because it's like an updated or maybe more targeted list of who should get this information. So for AF Division, instead of just saying chiefs of all stations, for all of Africa, it actually lists out specific cities. Johannesburg, Lagos, Nairobi, Pretoria, Rabat, Salisbury.
So getting more specific, not just everyone, just these key spots.
Right. And E Division is even more detailed. It lists Barcelona, Berlin, Bonn, Brussels, Copenhagen, Geneva, The Hague, Helsinki, Istanbul, Lisbon, London, Madrid, Milan. Munich liaison base, Munich ops base even, and that's at Lorient.
Wow, they really wanted to cover all their bases in Europe, didn't they?
Right. I mean, you could just imagine the kind of intelligence operations that were going on there during the Cold War.
Yeah, the Kennedy assassination, that would send shockwaves through that whole region.
For sure. The FE Division and NE Division, those lists also have specific cities like the AF Division.
It seems like they were moving away from this blanket approach, right? Not just sending it to the head of the division and assuming it trickles down. They're being very deliberate about who gets this information.
Exactly. And you know what's really interesting? The WH Division, Western Hemisphere, it has a super long list.
Okay.
It includes, all the major capital cities, but then also JM Wave, the CIA station Miami.
Yeah, the one focused on Cuba, right.
Exactly. And then even replant locations in Monterey and Norfolk.
Interesting. So they were definitely paying close attention to how this information was being received within the Western Hemisphere, especially with everything going on with Cuba at the time.
Oh, yeah. The Kennedy assassination had huge implications for U.S.-Cuba relations, so it makes sense that they'd be super focused on those stations.
Absolutely.
Okay, so this document, BD Tag 5847, it also has a whole new list of recipients at headquarters.
Oh, in addition to the field offices.
Right. There are different branches within the Central Covert Action Staff, the CA, and then all sorts of designations within the AF, FR, BB, DO, CRNA, UR, and that's probably European Division, but abbreviated differently here. Then HE, probably Hemisphere Division, then NE, and WH Divisions.
Okay. A lot of acronyms to keep track of. So what does this tell us?
Well, for one thing, it gives us a little peek into the CIA's organizational structure.
Like who reports to who and how information flows through their system.
Exactly. A lot of these codes and numbers, we don't know exactly what they mean, but they probably represent specific desks or units or even individual officers.
The people who needed to know based on their specific jobs, right?
Right. And it's interesting, too, because compared to that first dispatch, There are a lot more internal recipients this time around.
Hmm. Like maybe they realized they needed more people analyzing the Warren Commission's findings,
Right.
more input from different parts of the agency.
That's a good point. Okay, so let's step back for a second and think about what we've learned
Right.
from these two documents. What does all this internal communication within the CIA tell us about how they were handling the Warren Commission and its report?
Well, first of all, the sheer number of people who got this information, both around the world and within CIA headquarters, it shows how seriously they were taking it.
Right. This wasn't some minor thing they could just ignore.
Not at all. And then in that first dispatch, they really hammered home that point about presidential protection.
Yeah, like that was their top concern in the immediate aftermath of the assassination.
Makes sense. They were probably reviewing all their procedures, figuring out what went wrong, how to prevent it from happening again.
Exactly. And the fact that they specifically mentioned the Secret Service and the CIA's responsibility to support them, it shows they were thinking about interagency cooperation too.
Right, right. It's not just about what the CIA does on its own. It's about how they work with other parts of the government to keep the president safe.
Right. And then there's that whole thing about counterintelligence, operational cooperation. That's fascinating.
Yeah, because it shows how this investigation, it brought some of these really sensitive, secret aspects of intelligence work into the public eye, even if just a little bit.
And the CIA clearly wanted to make sure their people understood that,
Mhm.
what was being said about it, how it related to the assassination.
Right. I also find that shift in their distribution strategy really interesting. From that first dispatch, which was very broad, to that second document, which was much more targeted.
Yeah, it's like they were refining their approach in real time,
Yeah.
figuring out who really needed this information, who they needed to be talking to.
Makes sense. And the fact that they were sending this stuff all over the globe, it just shows how significant the Kennedy assassination was on a global scale.
Right. This wasn't just a U.S. story.
Mm.
It had implications for the CIA's work everywhere.
Absolutely. And those internal routing codes and recipient designations, even though we don't fully understand them now, they give us these little clues about how the CIA worked back then.
Yeah, like a glimpse into their internal bureaucracy.
Who had the power to decide what information went where? It's fascinating, even if it's a bit frustrating that we don't have all the pieces of the puzzle.
It definitely leaves you wanting more.
Yeah,
It makes you wonder what else is hidden in those archives.
exactly. And I think that's a great point to bring it back to our listeners.
Okay, what do you want them to think about?
Well, we've seen all this internal communication, right? This effort to get the Warren Commission's findings out to everyone in the CIA. So what does that really tell us about how they viewed the report? Were they just, ticking a box, making sure everyone was informed, or was there something more going on?
Like what?
I don't know. Were they trying to manage expectations? Were they anticipating certain questions from their people, maybe some pushback? Or even were they subtly trying to shape how people interpreted the assassination and the events surrounding it?
Hmm, that's a good question. It's like, what were they saying between the lines?
Exactly. And we have to remember, these are just two documents, two snapshots in time.
Right.
They don't tell us everything. They don't tell us what the CIA was thinking as a whole, or if there were disagreements internally about the Warren Commission.
Yeah, we don't get to hear those dissenting voices if there were any.
Right. But they do give us this incredible insight into what the CIA leadership at the time felt was important enough to communicate to their entire global network. They chose to highlight certain things, to emphasize certain points, and that's really valuable information.
Absolutely. Okay, so to wrap things up, I think we can say that these declassified CIA dispatches, they really give us this fascinating behind-the-scenes look at how a major intelligence agency was grappling with a truly historic event.
Yeah. They were trying to make sense of it, to figure out what it meant for their work, for the world.
And the way they spread that information internally, it shows how much emphasis they put on keeping their people informed, especially when it came to things like presidential protection.
Absolutely. And for our listeners, I think this deep dive has given you a sense of just how much goes on behind closed doors, how information flows through these big organizations, and how even something as seemingly straightforward as an internal memo can reveal so much about their priorities, their concerns.
Totally. And before we go, I want to leave you with one final thought. We've seen how far and wide this information spread within the CIA. So think about this. What impact might that have had on the agency's actions and analyses related to the Kennedy assassination in the long term? How did this internal understanding, this shared narrative, shape their thinking going forward?
It's an important question. Because every declassified document, it's just one piece of a much larger puzzle.
Right. A puzzle that, in many ways, we're still trying to solve today.
Exactly.
So keep those questions coming, listeners, and we'll keep digging for those answers. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
Always a pleasure.
See you next time.